Good sunny afternoon. Welcome back to my channel. We're going to do something a little bit different today. I've done most of my repairs and I'm catching up in a few odds and ends. One of the things that I dealt with this morning with a customer, which happens quite frequently, is talking to people about Turbo 7s, 10 degrees, which is kind of the main diet of what we use here on Canada's west coast. Most of what we have here is Douglas fir, cedar, red cedar, yellow cedar, hemlock, spruce, and things like that. A little tiny bit of pine, but most everything here is usually softwood. And a lot of people even read comments online about people running Turbo 7s, and some like them, some don't. And I'm going to go through what may be best for you and making the right decisions as far as hardware to support your bands. The number one thing you have to remember is that the difference between 10 degrees and Turbo 7s is the depth of gullet. We'll go into that in a minute. I'll bring you inside. I'll try and not over explain this to death like I normally do, but there are certain aspects of this that will make sense if you pay attention. I'll bring you inside, we'll go set up, and we'll go over some of the finer details. All right, I've got a quiet moment in the shop here, so I'm going to take full advantage of this. So right here, we have a standard 1.5 045 Turbo 7. Really common for a lot of people. You see a lot of people online using these and really enjoy them. For those of you that don't know, this is a Turbo 7, which refers to a 7-degree hook and a 39-degree back clearance. They're usually referred to as a Turbo 7 or a 739. There's the catalog number right there from Wood-Mizer. This is just an end of a roll from manufacturing. This is the standard 10-degree, which for us on the West Coast, we use a lot of these. The 10-degree also in this instance refers to a 10-degree hook and a 30-degree back clearance. Now the difference between the two is you can see how much deeper the gullet is on the Turbo 7. And in reality, this is what allows this band to cut so much faster. In the direction of cut, like for example, going across something like this piece of lovely red cedar that I have here, these gullets have the ability to contain more sawdust before it spills over the saw running out. The 10-degree tends to be much shallower, and these gullets can load up, and then the sawdust ends up spilling over, causing and generating heat within the band. And if you're running an LT40 or a 50 with a dead strain system, a lot of the times you'll see that needle and wider cuts will drop off because the front edge of the saw gets up to about 450 degrees during sawing, and that band heats up, and you'll see your gauge drop off a little bit, and then as you get out of the cut and water hits it, it'll come back up a little bit. Sometimes you have to go back and correct your tension. Now, the advantage to having the Turbo 7 is that it does carry more sawdust. The less degree hook allows smaller horsepower engines to run a heavier band like this and get away with it. The 10 degree, think of it as all season tires. It's good for all types of wood, some better than others, some not so good, but it's kind of like I said, all season tires. It's for us on the West Coast and for a lot of people around the world. The further east you go, or if you're sawing a lot of frozen wood, you'll see this hook go down to sometimes even 4 degrees, and it just allows to cut through the frozen sapwood a lot better. Or finer hardwoods than that too. We don't have any of that stuff here. But what I wanted to get into today is the people that run Turbo 7s, and this is something that I've found over the years. When I was sawing full time, I used to use a 13-degree, which they don't offer anymore because once they went to Turbo 7, this was just kind of the answer to it. Now, my assumption was that when I would get my bands, they were always a 10-degree. I would send them in to the company that I currently work for sharpening, and then I would always be like, they cut so much better when they come back. And the reason is because they were grinding them into 13 degrees, increasing this gullet capacity, and the cut was just night and day difference. Now, since they brought out the Turbo 7, since I've been here, the common, this is a 014299 guide roller. This is an 1.5 inch, pretty much a dedicated 1.5 inch guide roller, which most people think I'm running an 1.5 inch band. I should be running an 1.5 inch guide roller. Well, the difference between the two, you can see how much shallower the band is, or the body of the band is on the 10 degree, which is perfect for the 1.5 inch guide rollers. On a side note, for all of you who are going through alignment and stuff, this is really important and is overlooked by a lot of people. Pretend this is the underside of the mill. When your band is on here and you're looking at it from the underside, that band should be set right here by the time you have it dialed and tracked in. It should not be touching this when it's just at idle or when it's just static. It's not in the log. If that happens, If this is set up, rubbing on the back, number one, this wheel is rolling in this direction, so the flange is actually rubbing on the back edge of this band and will case harden it. You can take one of these that has been rubbing hard. This is actually a prime example of one that had an incident, and you can see the band was making contact with the back of this roller. This will case harden it, and if you notice you're cracking bands and you take it out into the sunlight and you give her a good bend and you look at it and you see the cracks aren't actually coming from the gullets, they're coming from the back, it's because this has been case hardened. You can take a file and drag it along here and it will not bite on it just from the action of it rubbing on these guide rollers themselves. Moral of the story is it should be set up on that last rib. The heel of the band should be set just like this. And when you're looking at it from up top, the Wood-Mizer manual will say that these should be canted like, this is an exaggeration, they should be like that, just ever so slightly. And the reason for that is, excuse me, the water and soap that'll be dripping onto your band or whatever you're using for lubrication, that slight angle will create a scrubbing action that will help remove pitch buildup, sap buildup, resins of that, things of that nature that build up on the band during cutting. So that's why it should just be an ever so slight angle, not this exaggerated, but just ever so minutely. And the other reason for having the heel of the band set up on the last rib is so that as this band gets duller, when you walk into the saw, it's not pushing on the back of that flange. It has room to do so if it's running on this last rib. If it's already sitting on this back flange or really, really close to it, when you walk into the cut or you splash into it, that heel of this band has nowhere to go and sometimes will start to slide down, causing the leading edge to go up, and you'll porpoise all the way through the log. So that's why it's really important to leave that 1/8 of an inch gap, so as the band gets dull, it actually has room to move. Now that being said, let's get back into the reason for this video. Is if you're running a 10-degree 1.5 inch and you're running 1.5 inch guide rollers, that's perfect. You can even see maxed out, we're pretty close to the gullet. If we're back on that last rib, we have room for that band to move back as it gets dull. The Turbo 7s, on the other hand, if you're running to the point where you're trying to leave space on the back edge for this band to move back, even if you're on the last rib, you can see how close you are to the gullets and actually, more importantly, the tooth that is set up. If you end up spacing it back to allow room for that to travel back and forth, you end up pretty much not even utilizing this 1.5 inch guide roller for what it was like. You're doing yourself a favor running 1.5 inch, but in some ways with Turbo 7s, it's detrimental to your cutting. The 1.5 inch guide roller is way more suited for running Turbo 7, or the 1.25 inch guide roller, sorry. This is the part number here, and if you look on the descriptor, it even says it's 1.25 inch and 1.5 inch blades. That's very important to note, that it's not, you're not running the wrong guide roller. So you can see with the Turbo 7 spaced on the heel of the band on the last rib, when you bring it back, it has much more stability. And this is a brand new chunk of band, so as you grind it down, you're getting closer and closer to the edge of the wheel. Now, this just allows you to run that thing and give the blade full support, but with the 1.5 inch guide rollers on here, what'll happen is a lot of guys end up starting to cut. As this is a brand new one, but as it gets worn down, these will move back, and you're actually, you can see how much it takes up. So when it runs back, you end up hitting the tooth that is set up, and it will deflect your blade down every time you try and lean on that mill. So unless you just whisper crawling through that log super, super slow, this seems to be the only time that the Turbo 7s will cut straight. And if you're trying to lean on it, really get some cutting and some board footage for the day done, you'll notice that you're cutting wavy lumber every time you try and push on it. So that seems to be a lot of the reason why guys will say, oh, I tried the Turbo 7s and blah, blah, blah. They don't cut and blah, blah, blah. Which, whatever, you're free to make your own decisions, but I'd like to give you some informed clarity on making decisions for yourself. So moral of the story is try running the 1.25 inch / 1.5 inch guide rollers. It may benefit you greatly in your sawing, and then you'll get the advantages of having the larger gullet capacities, speeding up your sawing. You're still going to get the nice deflection down on your guide roller and stability that it needs. But the Turbo 7s, I've found over about the last 2 years, I've been sending all new mills out with the 1.25 inch guide rollers when the customer specifies that they want the Turbo 7s. Really important. That's the difference that makes a difference. Well, so there you have it. The do's and the don'ts of the Wood-Mizer Turbo 7s. Whether or not they're right for you, hopefully you can make a bit of a decision. And if you have made the decision, hopefully you'll gain some knowledge here to get the most out of running them. I deal with people every day with their comments and their problems, and I really enjoy helping people because at the end of the day, when they're happy at the end of that phone call because they've been struggling, it feels pretty good to know that you've made somebody else's day, because man, I have been there. When you can't cut straight, I ran saws for many years, and when I got out of it, I was like, man, I got a lot to pass on to people, and figured this is the best way to do it. When people have problems, they usually turn to YouTube, and hopefully I can give you some real world information that I know is going to make your life better. Oh, there's my wife. Anyways, if you have any other video ideas, leave them down in the comments. I will get to them. Try and make a video on whatever I can that's going to help you along your way. Thanks. We'll see you in the next one.